Hi there, I'm Tina, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you're not alone. My sister called me a used single mom at her birthday party I paid for. But that wasn't the worst part. For years, I stayed quiet while my mother and sister tore me down, smiled to my face, then mocked me behind my back. And just when I thought I could take no more, my 8-year-old son stood up and said something that made the entire room freeze. What could an 8-year-old say that stopped everyone in their tracks? I stared at the glow of my laptop screen as the clock on my kitchen wall ticked past midnight. My small apartment in Austin was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the clicking of my fingers on the keyboard. Bills were stacked neatly to my left, a growing tower of overdue notices, school fees, and utilities I hadn't gotten around to yet. Numbers. That's what my life had come down to. Countless spreadsheets, late-night calculations, juggling every penny to make sure my son Noah had everything he needed. No safety net, no support system, just me, the responsible one. Outside, the September air had cooled, but the weight on my chest hadn't. My fingers paused on the keyboard as I glanced toward the small clock on my phone. Past midnight. Again. A soft knock pulled me back to the present. Noah peeked his head around the doorframe, hair messy from sleep, voice small. "Mom, do we really have to go to Aunt Maribel's birthday tomorrow?" I closed the laptop slowly and rubbed my tired eyes. "Yeah, buddy, we have to." He looked at me like he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth, then nodded and shuffled back to bed. After tucking him in, I sat back down, but I couldn't focus. My mind wandered back to last week, the conversation that started all this. Vivian, my mother, had called me casually while I was in the middle of a client meeting. "Your sister's planning her big birthday party, honey. She thought it'd be nice if you could help out. You know, cover the costs." I should have said no. I wanted to say no. But Vivian's next words were the same ones she always used to guilt me into obedience. "You wouldn't want to ruin your sister's special night, would you? You're always so reliable." Reliable. That's all I was to her. A wallet with a pulse. By the time I realized how much this party would cost me, the caterer had already been booked, the decorations chosen. And then, as if to twist the knife, Maribel posted on her Instagram 2 days ago. "Throwing the best birthday bash all by myself. #independent queen." I laughed bitterly when I saw it. Not a single word about me footing the bill. Not a single acknowledgement. Typical. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just this party. It was every family event, every holiday, every so-called special occasion where I was expected to show up, pay up, and shut up. My sister always got the credit. I always got the receipts. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how tired I was, not just physically, but in my soul. The silence I'd kept for so many years felt like a noose tightening around my throat. But I swallowed it down, again, for Noah. He deserved peace. He didn't need to see his mother fighting another war inside her own family. I got up from my chair, stretched my aching back, and made my way to his room. He was already asleep, one arm curled around his favorite stuffed bear. I leaned down, brushing a kiss across his forehead. As I walked back to the kitchen, I grabbed my phone to check if I missed any messages. And there it was. Vivian's latest reminder, like a slap across the face. "Don't forget, be on time tomorrow. And remember, not to embarrass Maribel." I stared at the text, my stomach tightening. How much longer was I supposed to bite my tongue? How much longer could I swallow my pride before it swallowed me whole? My mother's words echoed in my mind all night. I barely slept, staring at the ceiling while the weight of that message pressed against my chest like a stone. Morning came too quickly. By 9 a.m., I was already dressed and driving across Austin toward Vivian's house, the house I grew up in, but never felt at home. The sun was sharp and bright, the kind of day most people would call beautiful. I didn't notice. My stomach was tight the entire drive. When I pulled into her driveway, I took a deep breath, trying to prepare myself. I knew exactly what kind of day this would be. It was never just party preparations. It was an exercise in swallowing pride. As soon as I stepped inside, the scent of fresh flowers and vanilla candles filled the air. Vivian liked everything to look effortless, even though someone else, usually me, was always the one making it happen. She glanced up from her tablet, not even bothering to greet me properly. "You're late," she said flatly, although I wasn't. Before I could answer, she gave me a once-over, her eyes lingering too long. "Couldn't you have done something with your hair? You don't want people thinking you've let yourself go?" The comment stung, but I kept my face neutral. In the living room, Maribel stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing her speech like she was accepting an Oscar. She barely acknowledged me as I passed. "Mom said the caterer's late," Maribel said, flipping her hair without looking at me. "Make yourself useful." That was how it always went. My existence was a convenience, nothing more. I spent the next hour confirming guest lists, arranging table settings, smoothing out last-minute chaos, while they talked over me like I wasn't there. As I was double-checking the seating chart, I overheard Vivian talking to one of the decorators. "No, Tina's friends won't be attending. This is a classy event. We don't need her kind of people." Her kind of people. I paused, my hand tightening around the guest list. I waited until the decorator walked away before asking quietly, "You didn't invite Angela or Karen." Vivian barely glanced up. "This isn't one of your backyard barbecues, dear." Maribel chimed in from across the room, her tone coated in sugar but sharp underneath. "You know how awkward it'd be if your boring friends showed up? This is a sophisticated party." I swallowed hard, heat rushing up my neck. I wasn't surprised, but it still cut. It was one thing to exclude me. It was another to erase the people who actually cared about me. For the rest of the afternoon, I worked like a ghost, present but unseen. Every time I tried to speak, Vivian would redirect the conversation. Maribel would change the subject. I existed only to make sure the party would be perfect. By the time I left their house, the sky had already turned a soft pink. The drive home felt longer than usual. Noah was waiting at the window when I pulled in. At dinner, he noticed my quiet mood, because he always did. "Mom," he said, poking at his spaghetti, "why don't Grandma and Aunt Maribel ever say thank you to you?" I smiled weakly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Some people only see what they want to see, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we aren't valuable." Later that night, after Noah fell asleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. One thought kept circling, refusing to let me rest. If I vanished tomorrow, would anyone in my family even notice? The next morning, I drove to my mother's house with the same heaviness pressing on my chest. I'd barely slept, my mind restless with the same question that haunted me the night before. If I disappeared, would they even notice? The streets of Austin were still quiet when I pulled up. Early sunlight spilled over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat in the car for a few seconds, staring at the grand front door of the house I grew up in, a place that never really felt like home. When I finally walked in, I was greeted by the same cold efficiency as always. Vivian barely looked up from arranging silverware. "You're early," she said without warmth, as if that were a crime. Maribel's laughter rang out from the dining room, where she was adjusting the centerpiece of the long table. She looked flawless, as always. Her perfectly styled hair, her immaculate red dress, the picture of the perfect daughter. I knew my role. I stayed out of the way, smoothing tablecloths, checking details, making sure everything was flawless. Guests began arriving by late morning. Vivian greeted them like royalty, kissing cheeks and smiling wide. "This is my darling Maribel," she beamed, drawing every guest toward my sister, like she was the star of the show. When I was introduced, if at all, it was with a brief, distracted wave. "This is my other daughter, Tina." Other, like an afterthought. I moved through the crowd quietly, making sure nothing fell apart. That was my job, wasn't it? Keep everything running while remaining invisible. It wasn't until noon that I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a notification from Vivian's social media. "Proud of my beautiful family. So blessed." I tapped the post out of habit, even though I knew better. There it was, Vivian smiling beside Maribel in her red dress, the two of them glowing like a magazine cover. No sign of me. No sign of Noah. They'd literally cropped us out of the photo. A bitter taste filled my mouth, But I swallowed it, just like I always did. At brunch, Vivian kept the performance going. "Maribel is such a success," she gushed to anyone who would listen. "She's got the career, the connections, she's the whole package." When someone asked about me, Vivian waved it off. "Oh, Tina, she works with numbers, very practical." I didn't bother correcting her. I'd long since learned that whatever I did would never be enough. As I refilled the orange juice pitcher, memories I thought I'd buried started creeping back in. Birthday parties where Maribel blew out the candles while I cleaned up the mess. Holidays where I cooked dinner while they laughed in the living room. One memory burned more than the others: my college graduation. I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through school, stayed up nights studying until I fell asleep on my books. Vivian came to the ceremony, but left early. She said she couldn't stay because Maribel had a beauty pageant that same afternoon. That day, standing alone in my cap and gown, I understood exactly where I stood in this family. It was never about me. It never would be. As I folded the napkins at one of the tables, I heard Maribel's voice behind me. "You should really smile more tonight, Tina. People already think you're bitter." Her words slid under my skin like a splinter. I didn't look at her. I didn't respond. But inside, something sharp twisted and lodged itself deeper. Her words weren't new, but that day, they cut deeper than ever. By the time Maribel walked away, I felt hollowed out, like she'd scooped out something inside me and left nothing but the shell. The afternoon sun spilled lazily across the backyard as I finished folding napkins and double-checking the place cards one last time. Guests would start arriving in a few hours, but the house was already buzzing like a hive. The caterers were setting up trays, florists adjusting the arrangements. Vivian walked through the chaos like a queen surveying her court, her smile bright for everyone but me. I stayed in the background, making sure no detail was out of place. If anything went wrong, I knew who'd get blamed. At one point, I caught Noah sitting quietly near the sliding door, his small hands fiddling with a napkin, eyes darting between me and the laughter filling the room. He wasn't used to this much tension. He could feel it even if he didn't understand it. I walked over and knelt down. "You okay, kiddo?" He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "It's really noisy here, and everyone's talking over you." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him it wasn't always like this, but it was. Before I could say anything more, Vivian called my name sharply from across the room. "Tina, a moment, please." I stood and followed her into the hallway, away from the noise. She closed the door behind us, her smile evaporating the second no one else could see. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through me. "Tonight isn't about you. It's about Maribel. I don't want you mentioning your job or Noah. No one needs to hear about your sacrifices." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Vivian kept going, smoothing invisible wrinkles on her sleeve like she was tidying the conversation itself. "You've always had this unfortunate habit of making people uncomfortable. Don't do that tonight. Just smile, nod, and let Maribel shine." There it was, the same old message neatly packaged in fake concern. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "You're ashamed of me." She scoffed, waving her hand like I'd said something ridiculous. "Don't be dramatic, Tina, but let's be honest, you don't exactly fit the image." That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. I straightened my shoulders, my voice quieter but firmer. "I've been quiet long enough. You might not like who I become when I stop swallowing my words." Vivian's smile returned, thin and cold like glass. "You always were too sensitive." She walked away before I could say anything else. I stayed there for a moment, letting the silence settle over me like a weight. Then I went back to the living room where Noah was waiting. He looked up when I sat beside him, his small hand reaching for mine without saying a word. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. I forced a smile and squeezed his fingers gently. "I'm okay, and I'm going to make sure you're okay too." In that moment, something inside me hardened, not bitterness, but resolve. I wouldn't let them chip away at me anymore, not in front of my son. As the first guests began to arrive, the air in the house shifted. Laughter and chatter filled the rooms, the buzz of celebration echoing off the walls. But beneath it all, I felt something else. A quiet storm waiting to break loose. And it didn't take long before the first blow landed. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. String lights glowed softly over the backyard. The scent of roses and expensive perfume mingled in the warm Texas air. Laughter filled the space, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed beneath the music. Maribel stood at the center of it all, radiant in her red dress, a glass of champagne in hand. She laughed easily, moving from guest to guest like she was running for office. I stayed near the bar, Noah by my side, my eyes scanning the crowd without really seeing anyone. Vivian floated past me once, stopping just long enough to give me a thin smile. "Try to keep up tonight, sweetheart. Don't look so serious." I nodded tightly and went back to watching from the sidelines. It was safer there. Dinner began an hour later, guests taking their places at the long table. Vivian made her rounds, greeting each person like she was the hostess of the century. When she finally sat down, the conversation at her end of the table grew louder. I was seated a few spots away, not close enough to be included, but close enough to hear everything. It happened casually, like a joke tossed across a room. One of Vivian's friends leaned in and asked, "So what does Tina do these days?" Vivian's voice cut through the noise, loud enough for everyone nearby to catch. "Oh, nothing fancy, she's just a numbers girl. Sits behind a desk, crunching spreadsheets. But at least she's good at paying bills." The table chuckled politely, like it was a harmless joke. I sat perfectly still, my fingers curling around the edge of my plate. Numbers girl. That wasn't new. I'd heard versions of it my whole life, but tonight it felt heavier, sharper, like she wanted everyone to know I'd never be more than the woman who wrote checks and stayed quiet. I inhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but clear enough to carry, "I run my own financial consulting firm, and without me, this entire party wouldn't be happening." The table went quiet for a beat too long. Vivian let out a light laugh, waving her hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Oh, honey, no need to make this about you. We all know Maribel is the reason we're celebrating." I met her eyes and smiled tightly. "I'm not making it about me. I'm just tired of pretending I'm invisible." For a moment, no one said anything. Then the conversation resumed, shifting away from me like I'd never spoken. Later, as the party wound down toward dessert, I felt a small tug at my sleeve. Noah was looking up at me, his brows drawn together in that worried way he had when he sensed something was wrong. "Mom," he whispered, "why does Grandma talk about you like you're not good enough?" His question landed heavier than anything Vivian had said. I bent down, brushing his hair back gently. "Some people only see what they want to see, sweetheart, but the truth?" I leaned closer. "The truth always finds a way." Noah nodded solemnly, but I could tell he didn't fully understand yet. Neither did I. I didn't know then, but the truth was about to tear through the facade faster than I imagined. It started with a toast I wished I'd never heard. By the time dessert plates were cleared away and glasses refilled, the atmosphere had shifted. The polite small talk had turned louder, fueled by wine and showmanship. I could feel the energy around me tightening, like the air before a storm. Maribel stood at the center of the room, her red dress catching the light as she clinked her glass for attention. "Everyone, may I have your attention for just a moment?" The guests quieted, turning toward her expectantly. I stayed in the back, Noah at my side, my hand resting protectively on his shoulder. My heart thudded against my ribs, as if it already knew what was coming. Maribel smiled that rehearsed, perfect smile. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to me to celebrate with all of you." She paused for effect, letting the room soften before delivering her punch. "And, of course," she continued sweetly, "a special thanks to my sister Tina, the strongest single mom I know. She sacrificed her youth and career to raise a child alone. But hey, at least she's good at paying for parties like this." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was scattered, uncomfortable. Some chuckles, some eyes darting away. My stomach dropped as if the ground had vanished beneath me. She hadn't even tried to hide the insult. It was delivered with a smile, wrapped in faux affection, but sharp enough to draw blood. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, my fingers curling involuntarily at my sides. I glanced down at Noah, who was looking up at me wide-eyed, his small face confused and hurt. Something inside me snapped, not all at once, but like a thin thread finally breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. When the laughter died down, I stepped forward, my voice calm, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Thank you, Maribel," I said, lifting my glass. "It's good to know my money is appreciated, even if my presence isn't." The room went still. Eyes turned toward me, some surprised, some awkward. Maribel's smile wavered for a moment, but she recovered quickly, letting out a light laugh as if I'd made a joke. "Don't be silly, Tina. You're family." I met her gaze evenly. "Funny. I never quite feel like it." A few guests glanced at each other, shifting in their seats. The music resumed, chatter picked up again, but something under the surface had shifted. I could feel it. Later, as I stepped out onto the patio to catch my breath, I overheard Maribel talking to one of her friends near the bar, her voice sweet but soaked in sarcasm. "Well," she said lightly, swirling her drink, "at least I got my sister to pay for my party. That's what big sisters are for, right? Bank accounts and built-in babysitters?" Her friend laughed politely, but when I glanced toward the corner of the room, I noticed two other guests had clearly overheard. Their expressions weren't amused. They looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't heard anything. I stood frozen for a moment, the words clanging around in my head like bells I couldn't unhear. Noah came up beside me, slipping his hand into mine without saying a word. I looked down at him, the weight of everything pressing on my chest. The facade was cracking. I caught the glance of one guest across the room, a woman I didn't even know well. She looked at me differently now, not with pity, but with recognition, like she'd finally seen the truth peeking out behind the curtain. And then, as if on cue, my mother took the microphone and drove the knife even deeper. Her words didn't just bruise me, they set something inside me on fire. I didn't have time to catch my breath before the microphone crackled again, and my mother's voice took over the room. Vivian smiled at the crowd, as if nothing awkward had happened, as if she hadn't just let her youngest daughter humiliate me in front of everyone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice dripping with charm. "It's wonderful to see so many lovely faces here to celebrate my beautiful Maribel." She glanced around the room, then added sweetly, "And of course, let's not forget my other daughter, Tina. She's not as glamorous as Maribel, but she's dependable, like an old car that keeps running no matter how many miles she's got on her." A few guests let out uncomfortable chuckles, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. The words hit me square in the chest, like a slap delivered with a smile. My heart thudded painfully in my ears. I felt Noah stiffen beside me, his small fingers tightening around mine. Vivian wasn't finished. She may not have a fancy life or a husband, but she's always been good at showing up when we need her. That's what matters, right? I could see the cracks in the guests' expressions. Eyes flicked toward me, some full of pity, others with discomfort. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a step forward, my heels clicking on the tile louder than the music. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You know, Mom," I said evenly, "I may not have your approval, but I'll be damned if I let you step on me one more time." The room went silent. The tension in the air was sharp enough to slice through. Maribel rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath, but I kept my eyes locked on my mother. Vivian's smile tightened, her lips thinning like pressed paper. "Don't make a scene, Tina. This is Maribel's night." "Trust me," I replied, my voice low but clear. "The scene was already made the moment you decided I was nothing but a punchline." Before she could respond, I felt Noah's hand slip from mine. I glanced down and realized he was walking toward the hallway, his head hanging low. Alarm bells went off in my head. I excused myself quietly and followed him, but I wasn't fast enough. Behind the curtain near the back exit, I caught sight of Vivian bending down, her hand gripping Noah's shoulder. Her voice was soft but sharp, meant only for him. "You better behave tonight, little man," she hissed. "If you embarrass your mother anymore, everyone will see what a burden you really are." Noah didn't say a word. His face fell, his small body shrinking into itself. Before I could react, one of the waiters rounded the corner and caught the end of it. His eyes met mine, his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Anger, maybe. He nodded slightly, like he'd heard enough. Vivian straightened up quickly when she saw me, smoothing her dress like nothing had happened. "Run along now, Noah," she said sweetly, her voice flipping back to its public charm. "We wouldn't want to ruin your aunt's party." Noah slipped past her without looking up, straight into my arms. The waiter passed by me as I held my son, quietly murmuring, "Ma'am, I heard everything. I thought you should know." Something inside me broke clean in half. All this time I'd let them belittle me, mock me. But now, they were turning their cruelty on my son. And that, I couldn't forgive. At that moment, I realized, if they couldn't hurt me anymore, they'd go after my child. And I was done letting that happen. So when Noah stood up in front of everyone, I didn't stop him. It happened so fast, I almost missed it. I was still holding him close, trying to ground myself after hearing what Vivian had said to him, when Noah gently pulled away. Before I realized where he was going, he walked straight to the microphone at the front of the room. The chatter in the hall quieted as he reached up on his tiptoes, adjusting the mic to his small height. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, expecting a child's joke or birthday wishes. But then he spoke. "My name is Noah," he began, his voice small but steady, carrying through the stunned silence. "And I want to say something about my mom." My breath caught in my throat. The guests turned toward him, wine glasses paused mid-air, conversations frozen. "My mom isn't broken. She's not used," he said, glancing around the room with eyes far too serious for an 8-year-old. "She's the strongest person I know." A murmur rippled across the crowd. Noah's fingers fidgeted nervously, but he kept going. "She works every day so I can go to school, so I can have a good life. She paid for this party. She helped decorate. She made sure everything was perfect. Just like she always does." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes as he looked down, his voice softening. "And no one here ever says thank you." A hush fell over the room so deep I could hear the music outside, faint and distant. Noah stepped away from the mic, his eyes searching for me in the crowd. When he found me, I saw it, the tiny crack in his brave facade. I rushed forward and pulled him into my arms, holding him close. Before I could even think of what to do next, a voice rang out from the crowd. "You know," an older man said, rising from one of the tables near the front, "I've known Vivian and Maribel for years, and I've watched them treat Tina like this at every single family event." Heads turned, whispers swirled. Another woman stood up, her voice tight. "It's true. I used to think Tina just kept to herself, but now I see why." A third voice joined, then a fourth. One by one, people began speaking up. Guests who had attended birthday parties, holidays, family dinners. People who had seen the little slights, the subtle digs, and had never said a word until now. Vivian's smile faltered. Maribel's face drained of color. The weight of years of cruelty was now shifting in the room, pressing back toward them. Then, like a dying animal lashing out one last time, Maribel snapped. "Oh, please," she scoffed, stepping toward the front. "Of course she's playing the victim now. That's all she's ever done. She's good at pretending to suffer." Her voice cracked at the edges, desperate. This time no one laughed. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I walked back to the microphone, Noah's hand in mine. I knelt beside him so we stood together and spoke calmly. "You don't get to decide my worth anymore." My voice didn't shake. It rang clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. I turned to the guests who had spoken up. "Thank you for finally seeing me." Then, looking straight at Vivian and Maribel, I said the words I'd carried in my chest for years. "This is the last time you'll ever have power over me or my son." And with that, I took Noah's hand and walked away, leaving behind the noise, the whispers, and the people who never truly saw me. But walking away was only the beginning. 3 months had passed since that night, since my son's voice sliced through the noise and shattered everything I thought I had to endure. The air felt different now. That morning, as the autumn breeze rolled gently through downtown Austin, I stood outside a small brick building on 5th Street, staring at the freshly painted sign above the glass door. Weiler Financial Consulting. My name, my work, my rules. No more answering cold texts from Vivian, no more hollow invitations from Maribel disguised as family gestures, no more pretending. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The office was small but clean, bright and mine. The shelves were half empty, the furniture modest, but every inch of it belonged to me, built from the ground up without anyone else's permission. Noah ran past me, his backpack bouncing on his shoulder. "Mom, I put your new pens on your desk, and I organized the files." I smiled, watching him arrange the books with a seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. 3 months ago, I walked away from that party with nothing but my son's hand in mine. Now, I was standing inside the life I should have built years ago. The phone in my pocket buzzed, but I didn't need to check it. I already knew it wasn't from Vivian or Maribel. They hadn't contacted me since the night everything fell apart. Word had spread quickly after the party. Guests whispered behind their backs. Business partners quietly distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. Maribel's carefully curated public image crumbled almost overnight. She lost 2 freelance contracts. Her Instagram followers dropped like flies. Friends who once admired her extravagant lifestyle stopped returning her calls. Vivian, too, withdrew from the spotlight she loved so much. Without her parties and her family image to parade around, she faded into the background, reduced to whispers about, "What happened at that birthday?" I didn't take joy in it, not exactly, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing they no longer controlled the narrative. For years I had believed I was the problem, the bitter sister, the too serious daughter, the used single mom. Now I knew better. But knowing didn't erase the scars. Some nights, when the house grew too quiet, I'd still hear Vivian's voice in the back of my mind. "Don't embarrass us." I'd lie awake wondering how many versions of myself I'd twisted into just to fit their mold, and how much I'd lost trying. Forgiveness wasn't something I was ready for. Maybe one day, but not today. Today, I had a business to run, and a son who had shown me what real courage looked like. "Mom!" Noah called from behind my desk, holding up a folded piece of paper. "I made you something." He ran over, handing me a crayon drawing of our office logo, surrounded by a sun and 2 stick figures, him and me, holding hands. I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, pressing my cheek against his messy hair. "You know something, sweetheart?" I whispered. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Noah grinned and hugged me back. "And you're the best boss ever." A soft knock at the door pulled me from the moment. Elliot stood there, 2 coffees in hand, a tentative smile on his face. "Thought you could use a caffeine refill on your first day," he said. I smiled back. Not everyone who stood at that party stayed silent. Some people had seen and stayed. I took the coffee and nodded my thanks. As the 3 of us sat on the worn leather couch, Noah chattering away about his latest science project, I let myself breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a footnote in my own story. I looked around at my little office, my son's drawing taped proudly to the wall, and the people beside me. And I realized something. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when everyone else turns away. And sometimes, the voice that saves you is smaller than you'd ever expect. Before I end this story, I want to leave you with something I wish I'd heard years ago. For most of my life, I stayed quiet because I thought keeping the peace meant keeping the family. I thought if I bit my tongue and took the hits, it would earn me love or acceptance. But here's what I learned. Your worth isn't measured by who claps when you're silent. It's measured by how you stand when you finally speak. Family isn't just blood. It's who respects you, who lets you grow beyond the version they created in their mind. Sometimes it takes the smallest voice, like my son's, to remind you that you deserve to be heard. So let me ask you, have you ever stayed quiet to avoid conflict, even when it hurt you? Have you let someone's words define you for too long? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. And tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. If you want more real stories about people finding their voice in the middle of the storm, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.